She crawled to the river to die until a Lakota warrior lifted her and whispered, "Home." The sun had already begun to fall behind the cottonwoods when she crawled from the thorn grass toward the riverbank, dragging herself over sand that still burned from the day. Her dress, once white, once promised, was torn to ribbons, her hands bleeding from where she'd clawed at the dirt to keep from giving up. No one followed her now. The men who'd taken everything had left her for dead hours earlier, and she could still hear the echo of their horses fading into the canyon wind. She reached the edge of the water and stopped, too weak to drink, too proud to cry. The current whispered against the stones, a sound so calm it almost felt cruel. She thought of the preacher's words on the day she was sold, that a woman's place was to endure. But endurance felt like another word for dying slow. Her name was Mara Lynn, but even that sounded strange now, hollow, as if it belonged to the woman she had been before. She pressed her forehead to the damp earth and whispered, "Let it end here." But the world didn't end. It shifted. Hoofbeats approached, steady and unhurried, and she forced her head up long enough to see a rider framed against the dusk. He was tall and still, his hair bound in dark braids, his skin catching the copper light of the setting sun. A Lakota warrior, his presence as quiet as breath, dismounted and came to her side. He knelt, eyes level with hers, saying nothing at first, only studying the ruin she had become. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, a mix of wind and warmth. "Water first," he said. He lifted her by the shoulders with strength that felt more like care than force, held the canteen to her lips, and waited as she drank in trembling gulps. She tried to speak, to ask why, but her throat failed her. "No words," he said softly. "You've used enough." He dipped a cloth into the river and wiped the dirt from her face, each touch deliberate, almost ceremonial. "Why help me?" she managed. He looked past her, toward the horizon where the sky burned red over the Badlands. "Because the river said someone was still breathing." He stood then, carrying her as though she weighed nothing, crossing the water to where his horse waited. The motion jolted through her body, but the sound of the river faded behind them, replaced by the rhythm of hoofbeats and his heartbeat close to her ear. Somewhere between the echoes, she heard him murmur a single word, "Home," as if he were naming not a place but a promise. When she woke hours later, wrapped in a wool blanket beside a small fire under the stars, he was sitting nearby sharpening a knife, the flames reflected in his eyes. She tried to thank him, but he only nodded towards the sky. "You'll talk when the river stops echoing," he said. And she lay back, the word home circling through her half-sleep like a hymn that had finally found its singer. When morning came, the world was all gray water and pale mist, the kind of dawn that hid its mercy behind distance. Mara woke to the smell of smoke and coffee, the air cool against her face. She tried to sit up, but her body protested, muscles stiff from crawling through the night before. The Lakota warrior glanced over from where he knelt by the fire, his movements quiet and deliberate. "You'll tear your wounds open," he said, his voice calm, the kind that didn't ask, it told. She lay back against the blanket, staring at him through the drifting smoke. He was younger than she'd thought, though his eyes looked older than the hills around them. A scar curved from his jaw to his neck, faint but certain. "I should thank you," she whispered, but he shook his head once. "No thanks," he said. "Just eat." He handed her a piece of bread warmed in the coals, its edges blackened but soft inside. She ate slowly, each bite reminding her that she was still alive. When she looked up, he was watching her, not with curiosity, not even with pity, but with the quiet focus of someone measuring a soul to see if it could still stand. You have a name? She asked. Talon, he said. And you? Mara Lynn. Then Mara, he said, you rest today. River's not done with you. What does that mean? She asked. He didn't answer, only stood, tightening the leather strap of his rifle. You came here to die. The river sent me so you'd learn how to live. She stared at him, unsure if he was teasing her or telling some truth she wasn't ready to hear. He turned toward the horizon, scanning the distant ridges where crows circled over what might have been the tracks of men. They won't come back, he said. Cowards ride fast after cruelty. And you? She asked softly. What do you ride for? He paused, then answered, for quiet. The day passed slow. He repaired the horse's reins with sinew while she cleaned her wounds in the river, the water cool against her skin. At noon, she saw him lay a small pouch of herbs beside the fire, his hands steady as he ground them together. For fever, he said, if it comes. You were a healer? Once, he said, before I learned that some people don't want saving. She wanted to ask more, but the tone in his voice warned her away. As the sun fell and the first chill crept back into the air, she moved closer to the fire. You could have left me there, she said quietly. Would have been easier. He looked at her then, the light catching in his eyes. I've done easy before, he said. It never ends well. When night came, the wind changed. The smell of rain rolled in from the west, mingling with smoke. Mara pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Talon, she said softly, if the river sent you to keep me alive, what happens when I stop needing saving? He glanced up from the fire. Then I keep walking, he said. Some people find the road. Others are the reason it exists. He stood, feeding another branch into the flames, and for a moment she saw him silhouetted against the glow, strong, still, patient, the kind of man who carried silence like armor but mercy like a blade. She watched him until her eyelids grew heavy. Before sleep took her, she heard him murmur something in Lakota, a rhythm like prayer. She didn't understand the words, but she felt them settle in her chest, steady and slow. When she finally drifted off, the last thing she heard was the river, whispering again, its voice softer now, as if it, too, believed she might stay. By the second morning, the wind had shifted and the air smelled faintly of pine, the promise of higher ground ahead. Talon led the horse east, and Mara followed slowly behind, her legs still unsteady but no longer betraying her. The road curved through hills where the grass grew thick over forgotten bones of camps long abandoned. Every few steps, she heard the flap of wings overhead, a black crow keeping pace, gliding low and silent, its shadow stretching across the trail like an omen. It's been following us, she said. Talon didn't look back. Crows remember faces. Maybe it's curious. Or waiting, she whispered. Crows don't wait, he replied. They watch. His tone made her fall quiet again. By midday, they stopped beside a grove of aspens, their leaves whispering in silver ripples. Talon gathered branches for fire while she fetched water from a shallow creek. She caught her reflection there, sunburned, hollow-eyed, a stranger wearing her grief like a veil. She hated that she still looked like someone who'd belonged to others. When she returned, Talon was kneeling near the flames, carving something from a piece of driftwood. You make things, she said. Sometimes, he answered. It keeps the hands honest. What is it? A spoon, he said simply. You'll need one. They ate in silence, sharing stew he'd cooked with dried roots and rabbit. When she reached for more, he said, Slow. You've forgotten how to feed yourself. His tone wasn't cruel. It was factual, but the words stung anyway. "I haven't forgotten," she said. "I was just never taught." He looked up from the fire. "Then learn now." She slowed her motions, steadying her breath, the small act feeling larger than it should. The crow landed on a nearby branch, watching them both. Talon tossed a scrap of meat into the dirt. "It's not waiting for death," he said. "It's reminding us to stay alive." As the sun dropped lower, Mara found herself watching him work. How carefully he cleaned the knife, how he built the fire higher as the air cooled, how his silence didn't feel empty anymore. She wanted to ask where he came from, but instead she asked, "What do you believe in?" He didn't answer immediately. "In work done right," he said finally. "In things that stay mended. In people who mean what they do more than what they say." She nodded slowly. "Then what do you see in me?" "Someone who doesn't know yet," he replied. When night fell, she lay awake, listening to the wind move through the aspens. The crow still perched above them, a black shape against the stars. "Talon," she said softly. "Do you think people can start over?" He didn't open his eyes. "No," he said. "But they can keep walking until they remember why they should." She turned toward the fire, the spoon he'd carved resting beside her blanket. It wasn't beautiful, but it was solid, something that would last. She picked it up, holding it to her chest like a token of proof that she was learning again how to live. Above them, the crow gave a single low cry, not mourning but marking, as if to say it had seen enough mercy for one night. The next dawn came sharp and cold, the kind that made breath look like smoke. They left before the sun touched the rim of the hills, moving quietly through a country of stone and sagebrush. The crow still followed, black against the pale sky, and Mara had stopped fearing it. "You ever think it's leading us?" she asked, voice soft. "No," Talon said. "It just knows where we're headed." "And where's that?" "Somewhere that forgives." The words hung between them like mist. By midday, they reached a narrow ridge that overlooked a valley of dry creek beds and scattered cottonwoods. Talon stopped suddenly, crouched low, and motioned for silence. Mara followed his gaze and saw smoke, thin, rising from a hollow below, and a figure moving near it. He was a big man, his coat torn, his face turned toward the sound of his own hammer striking metal. "Mountain man," Talon whispered. "Hunter, might have food." They approached carefully, but before they reached him, the man turned, rifle already lifted. "That's far enough," he barked. "Ain't much for sharing company." Talon raised a hand. "We mean peace." The man looked them over, his eyes narrowing at Mara. "Peace don't come in pairs," he said. "You bring trouble." "We bring nothing," she answered quietly. "Then nothing's all you'll leave with," he growled, but the tension in his face cracked slightly when he saw how unsteady she was. "You sick?" "Tired," she said. "And alive." He hesitated, then lowered the rifle. "Got stew. Don't talk while eating." Inside his rough camp, a tin pot simmered over a small fire. The smell of beans and smoked elk filled the air, warm and grounding. Mara sat, wrapping her hands around the cup he handed her, the heat soaking into her bones. The man watched her eat before muttering, "You're lucky you found him," nodding toward Talon. "Most men don't stop for dying things." "He didn't find me," she said softly. "The river did." The man frowned, but said nothing. After they ate, Talon stepped outside to tend the horse. The mountain man leaned back on his crate. "You think he's your savior," he said, voice low. "But men like him, they carry ghosts heavier than you can lift." "So do women," she replied. His eyes softened a fraction. "Maybe," he said. but ghosts follow them different. A sudden sound split the air. 3 rifle shots from the north, echoing across the ridge. Talon was already on his feet, moving toward the noise. "Riders," he said. 5, maybe 6. "Bandits?" Mara asked. "Or worse." He turned to her. "You'll stay here." "No," she said, rising. "I've hidden enough." He almost smiled. "Then stay behind me." They moved to the edge of the ridge as the riders appeared. A rough band trailing dust, their laughter hard and joyless. Talon's body went still, his hand resting on the rifle strap. "They'll pass," the mountain man muttered, but the lead rider turned his horse toward the camp. "No," Talon said quietly. "They're coming." When the men reached shouting distance, one of them called out, "You got visitors?" Talon didn't answer. The bandit grinned, eyes sweeping over Mara. "That one looks familiar," he said. "We left her by the river." Mara's breath caught, every muscle turning to ice. Talon stepped forward, voice like stone. "You'll ride on!" The man laughed. "Or what, Riverman? You'll bleed again?" The next moment came fast. A single crack of gunfire, a puff of dust near Talon's boot. The mountain man cursed, grabbed his rifle and fired back. The ridge erupted into chaos. Mara dropped behind the wagon, the sound of bullets slicing air. Talon moved with precision. 2 shots, 2 men down. Then silence. The others fled into the canyon, their yells fading. When it was over, smoke hung heavy in the air, and the crow circled above once before vanishing into the sun. Talon reloaded calmly, his jaw set. "They won't come again," he said. "They learned what mercy costs." The mountain man stared at him, then at Mara, and nodded once. "You two carry storms," he said, "but maybe that's what keeps the fire lit." That night they stayed in the camp, the valley quiet again. As the flames flickered low, Mara whispered, "You said the river sent you. What if it was something else?" Talon looked at her, his face unreadable. "Then maybe it was the crow," he said. "And maybe it's still watching to see if we deserve saving." The wind began to rise before dawn. Rolling down from the black hills in restless waves that bent the cottonwoods and stirred the ashes from the night's fire. Talon was already awake, cinching the saddle straps tighter, his expression carved from the same stillness that came before lightning. Mara helped the mountain man gather what little food they had left, her fingers shaking as she packed the tin cups. The air felt heavy, swollen with something that wasn't just weather. "You should wait the storm out," the man said, glancing toward the western sky where thunder crawled along the horizon. "Storms find us whether we move or not," Talon replied. Mara met the man's eyes and gave a small nod of gratitude before following Talon down the ridge. The first raindrops came like questions, sharp, scattered, uncertain. Within minutes, the sky tore open. The storm swallowed the world. Rain came sideways, the wind howled through the trees, and every step turned the ground to mud. Mara's dress clung to her, soaked and heavy, her hair whipping across her face. Talon led the horse through the downpour, his head bent low, guiding them toward a cluster of rocks where they could wait out the worst of it. Lightning split the sky, bright enough to burn its memory into her eyes. She flinched and slipped, her knee striking stone. Talon was there instantly, his hand gripping her arm, steady and firm. "You all right?" he asked, though his voice was half lost to the roar of wind. "Just tired," she said, but he saw the tremor in her jaw. "You're afraid," he said. "I'm remembering," she answered. He held her a moment longer than needed, the storm whipping around them like judgment. "The storm doesn't care," he said. "That's what makes it honest." They found shelter in a shallow cave carved into the cliffside, the entrance half hidden by vines. Talon led the horse inside first, then helped her climb the slick rocks. Inside, it was dark but dry, the walls glistening with mineral veins that caught the flicker of their small fire. He wrung out his coat and set it by the flames. "You shake like you're freezing," he said, handing her a blanket. "I'm not cold," she whispered. "I'm angry." "At what?" "At God," she said, her voice cracking. "At the world, at men who called me less than human, at myself for believing them." He stared into the fire, his jaw tightening. "Anger's not a sin," he said finally. "It's proof you remember what right feels like." She looked up. "Do you ever forget?" "Every time I think I've learned enough," he said. "The world reminds me I haven't." The thunder grew distant, a low hum rolling through the valley. Mara sat close to the fire, watching the steam rise from her soaked dress. "When you said the river sent you," she began, "did you mean it?" He nodded. "Lakota say the river carries souls that haven't finished their stories. When it finds one still breathing, it gives them another chance." She swallowed. "Then what if I waste mine?" He looked at her, eyes reflecting the orange glow. "Then the river will forgive you anyway." She turned her face away, tears hot against her cold cheeks. For the first time since the night she'd crawled to the water, she prayed. Not to be saved, but to stay worthy of having been. Outside, the storm eased, and the sound of rain softened to a whisper. When dawn came, the sky had turned pale and clean, as if the storm had scrubbed the land of its sins. Talon stood at the mouth of the cave, watching the light spill across the valley. "You asked what I ride for," he said. "Now you know. For mornings like this, when the world remembers how to begin again." Mara rose, wrapped the blanket tighter, and stepped beside him. The air smelled of wet earth and pine. "Then maybe that's what I'll do too," she said. "Begin again." He looked at her and gave a single nod. "Then you'll need both hands free." He took the knife from his belt, cut the last torn strip of rope still tied around her wrist, and dropped it into the mud outside. The rain washed it away in seconds. She watched until it disappeared, feeling lighter, smaller, and somehow whole. The valley held its breath after the storm, every leaf dripping silver, every stone dark with memory. They rode in silence through the wet morning, the air so clean it almost stung to breathe. By midday, the clouds broke apart, and sunlight poured through in thin gold sheets, painting the road ahead with quiet hope. Mara sat behind Talon on the horse, her arms steady at her sides, no longer holding on out of fear but balance. They didn't speak until evening, when they reached a clearing beside a narrow stream where the grass grew tall and wildflowers pushed through the ash. "We'll stop here," Talon said. He built the fire slow and careful, stacking each branch as though it mattered where it belonged. When the first flames took hold, he sat back, staring into them. "This land," he said softly, "was my father's once, burned after soldiers came. I thought fire would always mean loss." "And now?" she asked. "Now it means we survived it." Mara took the kettle from his pack, filled it with water, and set it on the stones. "What about your mother?" she asked. He paused. "She taught me that mercy outlives blood." He looked across the flames at her. "Yours?" She hesitated, then said, "She died believing obedience would save me. It didn't." Talon nodded slowly. "Then maybe we were both raised by ghosts." The fire cracked, sending sparks into the dark. The warmth brushed their faces, softening the distance between them. For a while, neither spoke. Then he said, "When I first saw you by the river, I thought you were gone." "I was," she said quietly. The woman you found isn't the one who crawled there. Who is she, then? Someone who's still learning how to forgive the one who survived. He reached into his coat and pulled out something small, a feather bound with a strip of red cloth. Lakota give these to those who walk through storms and stand again. He held it out to her. For you. She stared at it, her throat tightening. I don't deserve it. No one does, he said. That's what makes it worth giving. She took it with shaking hands, the firelight dancing in her eyes. Then what do I give in return? Keep walking, he said. That's all the river ever asks. The night deepened, the stars crowding overhead. The fire's glow turned the world small, sacred, contained. When she finally spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. Do you believe people can belong to each other without owning? If they walk beside each other, he said. Not behind, not ahead. She nodded, the meaning settling like a prayer she'd been waiting to understand. He stirred the fire, and its light wrapped them both in gold. Tomorrow, he said, we'll reach Red Hollow. It's a new town. No one there knows what you were. And you? She asked. They don't need to. The wind rose, carrying the scent of cedar and rain. Mara shifted closer, the blanket slipping from her shoulders. Talon, she said, her voice unsteady. If I forget how to walk? He looked at her, his gaze steady and kind. Then I'll remind you what home sounds like. The flames danced between them, their faces mirrored in the shimmer of light and shadow. She held the feather tight against her chest, the first gift she'd ever received that wasn't payment or pity. Outside, the world was still wet, still mending. Inside the circle of firelight, two people sat in silence that felt less like emptiness and more like promise. When she finally drifted to sleep, her head resting against her folded arms, Talon added one more branch to the fire. Rest, river woman, he murmured. You're almost where you were meant to stop running. The fire answered with a soft hiss, the kind that sounds like agreement. They rode until dusk, following the stream eastward until the land softened and the first shapes of Red Hollow rose against the fading light. Half-built barns, the thin steeple of a church not yet finished, smoke curling from chimneys where settlers had learned to live with dust. The horse slowed as they entered the main road, hooves sinking into the damp earth. Children stopped their games to stare. No one spoke. New faces were a kind of weather here, something to be measured before trusted. Talon dismounted first, his presence quiet but certain. You'll stay, he said simply. There's work at the boarding house. Mara slid down from the horse, her legs stiff from the ride. And you? She asked. I'll find the river again, he said. It's what I do. She wanted to protest, to ask him to wait just one more night, but before she could, the innkeeper stepped onto the porch, a broad woman with an apron dusted in flour. Travelers? She asked. A woman in need of rest, Talon said. The innkeeper's eyes softened. Then you found the right place. She led Mara inside, where the smell of bread and soap filled the air. The room she offered was small but clean, the kind of space that felt borrowed from peace itself. Mara turned to thank Talon. But he had stayed outside, rain glistening on his shoulders. You'll come back? She asked through the doorway. The road circles, he said. All roads do. Then he mounted and rode into the dusk, his figure fading into the silver horizon. For the first time since the river, she slept in a bed. The walls creaked, the wind hummed through the cracks, and still she dreamed not of pain but of water, clear, calm, endless. When morning came, the innkeeper brought her coffee and said, We could use another pair of hands if you can sew or clean. Mara smiled. I can learn. And she did. Days became a rhythm, washing, cooking, mending, listening to the quiet rise and fall of a town, trying to believe in itself. No one asked about her past, and she didn't offer it. The church bell that Reverend Ellis had hung months before now rang at noon each day, its sound folding through the valley like a reminder that faith, like bread, had to be made daily. Weeks later, while scrubbing the porch floor, she saw a shape on the ridge, tall, familiar, motionless. Talon. He didn't ride down, only watched until the bell rang, then turned his horse and disappeared into the trees. She didn't chase him. She just smiled, because for the first time she understood. Not all goodbyes were endings. Some were benedictions. That night, when the children in the kitchen asked her to tell a story before bed, she told them about a river that refused to let a woman die, about a storm that washed the world clean, and a man who spoke only one word that mattered. When she whispered that word, home, the children sighed like it meant something they already knew. Later, when the candles burned low and the house settled into sleep, Mara stood by the window and looked toward the hills. The stars glimmered above them like scattered embers from an old fire that refused to go out. She touched the red threaded feather still tucked inside her sleeve and whispered, You were right, Talon. The river never ends. It just waits. By early spring, the earth around Red Hollow began to green again, shy blades of grass pushing through the brown. Mara spent her mornings sweeping the porch of the boarding house, and her evenings helping the women hang lanterns along the road. The town had learned to trust her quiet ways. The way she listened before speaking. The way she looked at people as though she remembered what it cost to be kind. One morning, she found 2 children sitting by the well, barefoot, their faces streaked with soot. You belong to anyone? She asked softly. The older girl shook her head. Mama's gone. The preacher said we could stay till someone takes us. Mara knelt, brushing the dirt from the child's cheek. Then I'll take you for now, she said. You can help me with chores, and I'll feed you as long as I have bread. The younger boy frowned. Why? Because someone once did the same for me. She led them back to the inn, made them wash, and gave them a blanket each. That night, they slept on the floor by her bed, and the steady sound of their breathing filled the room like the hum of a hymn long forgotten. The next weeks were full of small, holy work, teaching the children to sew patches, to scrub floors, to listen for the bell that marked noon. The girl began to hum while she worked. A tune that grew louder each day. Mara smiled but said nothing, remembering her own silence, how heavy it had been. When Reverend Ellis visited to bless the new roof, he paused at the sight of the 3 of them standing by the fence, hands dusted with flour. Looks like the Lord's built his church without my help, he said, smiling. Mara laughed softly. Maybe he just needed a few more hands. That evening, she took the children down to the riverbank where the willows bent low over the water. This is where I was found, she told them, by a man who taught me mercy doesn't belong to anyone. It moves like the river. The boy skipped a stone and said, Then maybe it'll come back someday. She smiled. Maybe it already has. Days turned to weeks, and one afternoon, while hanging laundry, she heard hoofbeats approaching fast along the road. The sound struck something deep inside her before she even turned. A figure came into view, tall, calm, wrapped in the same quiet she remembered. Talon. He reined in his horse at the gate, dismounted, and stood there without a word, hat in hand. The children ran to hide behind her skirt, peeking at him with wide eyes. You found your home, he said at last. "And you found yours," she replied, nodding towards the hills. He looked past her at the children. "They're yours?" "They're everyone's," she said softly. "That's what home means here." He smiled faintly. Then the river finished its work. "No," she said. "It just brought us the rest of it." They shared supper that night. Bread, stew, and quiet. The children watched him with fascination, asking about his horse, his travels, his scars. He answered each question with the patience of a man who'd learned that silence teaches faster than speech. When they finally went to bed, he rose to leave. "The road's long," he said. "And kind," she answered. "Stay till morning." He hesitated, then nodded. "Just till the light." The fire burned low between them, the air thick with words they didn't need to say. Mara watched him as the flames danced against the window, her hand resting on the red feather still tucked at her heart. Outside, the river whispered softly through the reeds, and for the first time she understood it completely. It hadn't saved her life. It had carried her to the people who would finish saving her soul. When morning came, it was gentle and gold, the kind of light that makes everything it touches seem forgiven. The town had begun to stir, the clang of the blacksmith's hammer, the laughter of children running after chickens, the far-off ringing of Reverend Ellis's bell, and still Talon stood by the fence, his coat damp with dew. Mara brought him coffee in a tin cup, the steam curling between them like breath. "You'll ride out today," she said, not as a question but a truth. "That's what I do," he answered. "You still believe the road never ends?" "It doesn't," he said, "but sometimes it slows long enough for you to look back." She smiled faintly. "Then look around instead." He did. The little boy was chasing the girl across the yard, both barefoot, both laughing so freely that even the crows seemed to pause on the fence posts to watch. "You keep them?" he asked quietly. "No," she said. "I keep the promise that someone once made to me." They walked to the river together, the same place where she'd first heard his voice. The water moved lazy and low now, the sunlight catching on its surface like tiny prayers. "I thought I came here to die," she said. "Now I come to remember." Talon knelt by the bank, dipped his hand in the water, and let it run between his fingers. "The river doesn't forget," he said. "It just forgives faster than people do." She watched him for a long time before asking, "Why did you come back?" "Because I saw the fire," he said, "and I knew mercy burns brighter when shared." He rose, brushing the mud from his palms. "You taught the children to listen to water. That's faith." "You taught me how," she said. "No," he replied softly. "You just stopped hearing everything else long enough to listen?" The wind lifted, carrying the scent of the wheat fields beyond town, and she saw how the years had settled on his face, not as burden, but as proof. He'd been the kind of man who disappeared before the dawn could ask him to stay. Now he lingered. "You could stay here," she said. "No one would ask who you were before." He smiled slightly. "And who would I be then?" "The man who showed us how mercy walks," she said. "That's enough." The bell in the town square rang then, clear and certain. He turned toward the sound, nodding once. "You built a place where it rings without fear. Don't lose that." "And if you ever stop walking?" she asked. "Then I'll find the river again," he said. "It always circles back." He took the feather she'd carried and tied it to the end of her braid. "Now the wind will remember you," he said. She blinked back tears, her voice barely steady. "You said once the river gave me another chance. What did it give you?" He met her gaze. "You." He rode out before noon, the sound of the horse fading into the hum of the valley. Mara stood long after he was gone, her fingers brushing the feather against her shoulder, feeling not loss but completion. The river whispered below, the children's laughter echoed behind her, and she realized that home was not a place you reached. It was what remained after mercy had done its work. When she turned toward the town, the church bell rang again, softer now, as though it had learned to keep time with her heart. The summer sun came slow over Red Hollow, touching every rooftop and fence post with a quiet warmth that made even the old boards seem new. Mara stood outside the boarding house, sweeping the porch, her apron faded, her hair braided neatly with the red feather still bound at the end. The two children she'd taken in ran along the fence, chasing a dog that had decided it belonged to them. The sound of their laughter wove itself into the morning like music. Across the square, Reverend Ellis rang the bell and waved from the church door. "You'll wear that feather thin," he called. "Then I'll let the wind carry what's left," she said. The townsfolk had stopped asking about her past. They only knew she worked hard, prayed when the bell rang, and treated everyone as if they'd been spared from something unseen. At noon, she walked to the river. The path was lined with wildflowers now, the same place that once smelled of ash and thunder. The water shimmered bright under the sun. Gentle and sure, she knelt, touching the surface lightly with her fingertips. "You kept your promise," she whispered. Somewhere beyond the bend, she imagined Talon riding through the valleys, quiet as memory, his silence steady as faith. Maybe he'd found another soul half buried by sorrow. Maybe he was still listening for her name in the wind. She smiled, knowing he would hear it eventually. That night the town gathered for supper outside the new church. The tables were rough planks laid across barrels, covered with loaves of bread and stew. The air smelled of smoke, rain, and forgiveness. Mara sat with the children, helping them ladle stew into bowls. "You think he'll come back?" the boy asked. She looked toward the horizon glowing red with sunset. "He never left," she said. "Not really?" The girl frowned. "But he's gone." "Home isn't a person who stays," Mara answered softly. "It's what their mercy leaves behind." When the meal ended, Reverend Ellis stood and said a prayer for the living and the lost. Mara bowed her head, her hand resting over the feather. She didn't ask for safety or for love. She only thanked the river for bringing her this far. Later, when the stars rose, she walked once more to the water's edge. The current caught the moonlight, turning the whole river silver. She let the feather fall into it and watched it drift away, slow and certain, carried toward a horizon she no longer needed to reach. "Go where you're needed," she murmured. The wind stirred, and for a moment she thought she heard Talon's voice carried back across the dark. Home. She closed her eyes and let the sound settle deep inside her. Not as longing, but as peace. Behind her, the bell of Red Hollow rang once, clear and low, and the echo rolled across the valley like a final blessing. Mara turned toward the lighted windows of the town and began to walk back, her steps unhurried, her heart quiet. The road had ended exactly where it was meant to, at the place Mercy decided to stay. Sometimes the road doesn't lead you home. It teaches you what home truly means. Thank you for watching Echoes of the West. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to keep these journeys of mercy and redemption alive. Would you have stopped by the river, or kept walking until mercy found you?